This is Tricia Sheehan of White Feather Healing, and I'm reading some excerpts of my book, Sacred Journey of a Celtic Visionary. If you would like more information about my book, you can contact me at www.whitefeatherhealing.com. And this is the introduction pages to my book. A fresh start. Saturday, the 10th of September 2005. Matala, South Crete. Our journey to Crete began Saturday, the 3rd of September. Our luggage never arrived. It was lost somewhere in transit. A week later, it is still missing. There have been sightings in Dublin, London and Athens, but lo and behold, it has given them the slip yet again. Since I arrived, despite my nakedness, my eyes have been drawn towards the skies, where I have observed eagles in ones and twos soaring at great heights, and somehow I feel guided on this journey by these sacred messengers whom I have never observed before now. This last 18 months for me has been a challenging time, and I know I am being spiritually initiated into the next phase of the journey, the birth of this book. It makes sense of the huge emotional clearing I am experiencing. This time too will pass, I remind myself, and the miracle of birth makes the labour worthwhile, as anyone who has given birth to a project or child will know. Last night I dreamt I saw an eagle soar, and gliding expertly it landed on the ground close to me. I was fascinated by the eagle, but as it fixed its eyes on me and began to follow me, I felt very frightened and ran to hide somewhere. I then woke up hearing clearly in my mind, "The eagle has landed." The eagle soars to the highest point in the skies and with accurate precision sees every aspect of what is beneath, even the tiniest movement. The eagle represents the birth of this book that I have begun writing today, the telling of my story, the sharing of all the wisdom I have gathered and the awareness that has awoken in me over time. As with every precious project, there is fear, the fear of exposure, judgment, or abandonment. Yet I know I am more than ready to write this book and to gift all that I am creatively to the earth. And so the story begins. Chapter 1. Birth and Beginnings. My fantasy is that I rode on the back of a powerful whale from the deepest ocean, swimming through the giant red waves of the Atlantic, and birthed onto the shores of the Burren in County Clare, Western Ireland. In reality, on the 9th of March 1956, my mother was hemorrhaging and had to make the terrifying trip by car, some 40 miles from the Burren on one side of the bay to Galway City on the other. She must have been very scared that she would not survive. We arrived in Calvary Hospital, aptly named Galway, and in her words, a doctor who treated her like a butcher took over, breaking her waters and spraying the walls with her blood. We were, both of us, in grave danger. It was my first near-death experience, but we survived, and here I am to tell my tale. My mother, born Bridget, but called Breathe, was young, just 23 when I was born. She was dark-haired and very beautiful. I was her second child. My sister Marion was born 2 years and 3 months earlier. My mother was reared on the foothills of the Burren on the edge of the Atlantic Ocean that looks across to Galway Bay and the Aran Islands. It is a wild and beautiful place. The unique lunar landscape, home to many species of wildflowers and animals. And the stone mountains seen from space have a great similarity to the moon. As always, the ocean there has many faces, most often pounding the coastline with big waves, but every now and then calmness and stillness descends, as if the ocean were playing a lullaby to a sleeping baby. My mother was one of 9 children, and her partners Delia and Joe McNamara ran a business which consisted of a grocery shop, flour and grain store, farmlands, and later a petrol station. They were hard-working and wealthy for their time. My mother met my father, Michael Sheehan, some 18 years her senior, when she was around 17 or 18. He was the principal of a small primary school in Ballyvaughan, County Clare. He was a handsome, kind, hard-working man, very dedicated to his wife, children and career. Both of my parents were born in August, under the astrological sign of Leo. My father was born and reared on Ullán Clara, an Irish-speaking island, the most southerly island in West Cork, Southern Ireland. It is a stunningly beautiful wild mountainous island, with views to the famous Fastnet Lighthouse of yachting fame and onwards to the USA. The winters there are harsh, and often in those days storms would cut off the inhabitants from the mainland for a substantial period. My father was one of the eldest of 10 children, and as his father Tommy spent many months away at sea fishing each year, my father helped his mother Catherine to rear the younger children. They were very poor, being barefoot for a lot of their childhood. Yet my father spoke of storytelling, dancing and music, and had a deep love of his home place. While having a deep desire to become a fisherman, my father was very clever at school, winning a scholarship to be schooled in a boarding school in Dublin, and later another scholarship to a training college in Waterford, Southeast Ireland, to train as a primary school teacher. So fishing became a hobby rather than a career. Following the footprints of his career led him to County Clare, where he met, fell in love with and married my mother. We lived in a rented cottage on the edge of the ocean in Ballyvaughan, County Clare. My mother said I screamed solidly for 6 months after I was born, what a nightmare, and had to be fed baby food for problem children. However, I shut up after that 6-month period, for a number of years at any rate, and she said I became the quietest of her 4 children. My quest to free my soul and spirit, to express all that I am through my physical and emotional body, is reflected in the wild, beautiful places my parents hailed from. Also the Burren, akin to the moon representing the emotional mother of the earth, reflected the huge journey of emotional development, healing, and teaching I was to take. When later, at 27, I embarked on a spiritual and emotional journey of discovery about myself, I was regressed through a meditative journey back to my birth, and I felt so intensely guilty and responsible for hurting my mother and causing her the pain of my birth. That I carried with me a sense of deep unworthiness and a need to make up for it for many years. I felt that no matter what I did, it was never good enough for her. The circumstances of my birth awakened old attitude patterns in me from past lifetimes, I believe, that I brought into this life to be healed, and also created a difficult relationship with my mother for that first 6 months, and again as a teenager, one we would heal much later on. During that birth regression and the exploration of the near-death experience, I realized a part of me wanted to go back into the spirit world, as I was terrified of my deep sensitivity and the journey ahead. But another part of me was rock solid and determined to stay with the plan. We come to this earth with a spiritual scroll, wherein is written all that we desire to learn, explore, express, and experience in a given lifetime. This contract or scroll is written by our creative spiritual selves, and so we have a definite journey in mind when we enter the earth. It is my understanding that we choose our parents, surroundings, and the circumstances of our birth, so there is no random chance. It is a well-crafted choice we make. We are individuals with free will, a will no one but us can control, and when others appear to control us, it is only because we are allowing them to do so for a period, because we have deactivated our own free will for some reason or other. Having said that, spiritually, we often choose very challenging circumstances to learn and grow through, and we deserve an abundance of love and support to encourage us through. We have to honor the chosen journeys of others and support them in whatever way is comfortable for us. So getting back to my birth, I did some healing and transformational work at age 30, which I will explain later, and it greatly relieved the pressure of that time. A side effect of the circumstances of my birth was that I experienced terror of death or serious illness, and also a sense of becoming spaced out, and that I was leaving my body many times when I drove long journeys in the car alone. It took me a while to recognize that stored in my cells was the memory of my mother and I panicking that we would not survive at the time of my birth. Thus, the car journeys on my own activated that memory. My mother and I must have felt very alone and scared during that journey. So I have journeyed into my cells many times to heal this memory, and now I find long journeys alone in the car a much more comfortable experience. Our cells store and remember everything about us, all of our experiences, emotions, reactions and sensations. All things can be transformed and healed within us. And yes, only we can heal ourselves. But all the support, therapy and encouragement we need is there for us, from the heavens and the earth, once we reach out for it. So if you need support, reach out and ask for it. That's why it is there. We are interconnected in this web of life, all needing the support and wisdom of the other. County Clare gifted me my loving parents, grandparents, sister, family, friends, and the powerful ocean, whose breath is in every cell of my body. I am a Piscean, a water creature, birthed onto the land and the wild free energy of the Burren in County Clare, Western Ireland. Chapter 2. East meets West. When I was at the tender age of 2.5, my parents decided to leave the West and journey to put their roots down in the east of Ireland. As I write the word east, it feels alien to my Western birthplace. They chose a home in the developing suburbs of West Dublin, and my father secured a teaching position in a very large school, which he was later to become principal of. I promptly became very ill, with what was diagnosed as gastroenteritis. My mother set up a makeshift bed in our new breakfast room, just beside the kitchen, and patiently put teaspoons of fluid into my mouth to try and keep me hydrated. But my condition deteriorated. In a state of near unconsciousness, I was moved to hospital, where I was placed in an oxygen tent. At that time, parents were not allowed to visit, and visits were brief. So not alone had I been taken away from my beloved grandmother, relations, friends, and wild western ocean, now I was also separated from my parents and sister. Having been snatched from the cradle of Western Ireland and all that it contained, and from the familiar loving arms of my parents, I wanted to die and experience the second near-death experience of my short life. Later I regressed back to that time and saw that leaving my grandmother, Mama Mac as we called her, had a dramatic effect on me. She had a similar sensitivity to me, and she was the only adult female around me at that time who felt like a kindred spirit. I grieved hugely for that time when I was much older. During that regression, I felt very scared without my grandmother, and again that I wanted to return to the spirit world, as I felt terrified of my sensitivity and difference, and had a huge fear that I would not survive or be nurtured in this world. Again, there was a solid part of me, stubborn, some might say, that was staying with the job, and so I recovered. I know heaven and my guides and angels, as well as the doctors and nurses, were working hard to support me in the recovery process at that time. Gastroenteritis affects the tummy area, and this area governs a person's self-worth, self-belief, and ability to function with confidence and be nurtured in the earth. And I carried huge fears that resulted from painful past life experiences into the earth with me to be healed in this regard. Our lives settled into a pattern, and I settled down. I loved primary school and had a wonderful teacher called Mrs. Fleming throughout most of my primary education. She was not formally trained, but was a naturally gifted and very brilliant teacher, and I flourished, proudly wearing the metallic green captain's badge, given for top marks in the class every other week. My mother said I would not eat until I had completed my homework underneath the table. The moment I returned from school, I loved reading, learning, and playing a myriad of games on the road with my friends. Christmas and birthdays were very special times in our home. My mother was very strict and disciplined, but it did not affect me unduly at an early age, as I was a quiet child and tried very hard to please. She was also a wonderful homemaker, a great cook, and a very brilliant seamstress. She made a lot of our clothes, hand smocking our dresses when we were little. Christmas Day was magical. It began with 7 a.m. Roman Catholic Mass, and Santa's room was always locked and out of bounds until after Mass. There was always something magical under the tree, a doll, books, games, a three-wheeler bike once. Breakfast followed, always fresh grapefruit, and a full Irish breakfast with homemade brown bread and old-time Irish marmalade. It was expected in our house, if my mother cooked, that we washed up and cleared the table. My father took an active role in running the home when he was there. He nurtured my mother beautifully as I observed it, putting a hot water bottle in her bed, making her coffee, cooking, cleaning, and generally supporting her in every way he could. He always fed us during the night as babes, and though he was teaching full-time, he never allowed my mother to get up. There were 2 rooms in our house considered the good rooms, they being the dining room and the sitting room, the latter being used for visits akin to that of the Pope. On Christmas Day at 2 or 3 p.m. we descended on the dining room, sitting at the good table that was adorned with a white linen tablecloth, the good china with the swans, silver cutlery that had been painstakingly cleaned, Christmas crackers, and so forth. The china-covered dishes filled with perfectly cooked and buttered mashed potato, Brussels sprouts, and carrots arrived. Next came the china sauce boat, filled with hot cranberry sauce, and the piping hot china plates, adorned with perfectly cooked turkey, ham, and divine bread stuffing. It was followed by homemade plum pudding, always set alight in the darkness to our great delight as children, with brandy sauce, sherry trifle, and Christmas cake. The crackers, hats, jokes, and a cup of tea followed, accompanied by the circus on the television and a lot of delicious overfull moaning and groaning. This feast and the using of the good china happened about once a year, and so Christmas Day had a magical, out-of-the-ordinary feel to it. It was only later as a parent that I realised the hard work it took to gift this type of day to one's children. I always felt special on my birthday, receiving a card, a gift, and a birthday cake. And to this day I celebrate myself on my birthday, and have encouraged many friends who disliked their birthdays to do the same. When a child is born, we celebrate the miracle of birth. And why not continue honouring the preciousness of that child throughout its lifetime? During primary school, I had a lot of septic throats, had to be confined to bed regularly, and often injected each day by the doctor. Eventually, I was taken to a throat specialist who decided to wait and see if I would grow out of it. Much later, I discovered that the throat area governs expression and communication. And as I opened my throat area to give a voice to my inner feelings and dreams, My throat responded and got fully better. So throat infections are not a problem for me anymore. We spent our summers, July and August of each year, in the west of Ireland, and I loved it. We rented an old house called The Residence, together with my Aunt Carmel's family, and there we bathed in the magic of the West every summer holiday. My dad spent many hours fishing with us on the high rocks overlooking the Atlantic Ocean, and he held us while we cast the rod and taught us to sit, be still, and guard the fish he caught that jumped in the rock pools. He brought us to the sandhills to swim, play, and dig for sand eels that were used for fishing bait. He brought us to the Rock Mountains and taught us about the wildflowers. We walked to our grandparents' home, helped in the shop, popped sweets and chocolate into our mouths, served petrol, and helped with gathering the hay for the winter months. And we were surrounded by aunts, uncles, and cousins. During one of our summers in County Clare, we went to visit my godparents in Ennis. Mary, my mother's sister, and Jimmy, her husband. They lived in a market town where they had a 3-story house. The ground floor was a supermarket and the upper floors their home. I was about 8 or 9 and wandered upstairs, where I met this old man who in hindsight looked like my Uncle Jimmy, and we chatted for a while. He was sitting in one of the bedrooms. I thought nothing of it, till I mentioned to the adults that I was talking to the man upstairs. They told me there was no man there, and I silently could not understand why they were lying to me. Repeatedly I asked about this man, but no one was ever willing to discuss it with me. Astrologically, they say Piscean children are very psychic and can meet their granny on the stairs. But I guess many young children are open and psychic, enabling them to have heightened spiritual experiences, like seeing people from the spirit world. This man, Jimmy's father, was dead, but no one told me that either at the time. Later, my son brought home some County Clare records, and this man was listed as owning this home and having a business there. There was nothing extraordinary about chatting to him. It was the reaction of the people around me that caught my attention. 1.5 years after we moved to Dublin, my brother Finbar, now known as Barry, was born prematurely. I adored my little brother, and like all siblings, we played, laughed, fought, and cried. As a toddler, he developed pneumonia and was taken to hospital, but 24 hours saw him bouncing back. My mum told me to look at what happened to him after all the fighting I had done with him. The cot was empty, and at 5 or 6 I felt so guilty and responsible for making my little brother ill. We as parents have to be so careful with our children. I held the pain of that for a long time. When I was 8, my mother was confined to bed with high blood pressure, as she was expecting my brother and the baby of our family, Aina. My grandmother, Mama Mac, died at that time. Dad took my sister Marion to the funeral, and I stayed at home with my mam and brother Finbar. We knelt around her bed and said rosaries, Catholic prayers. The house felt very sad, and my mam did not get to say goodbye to her mother. We so need the ritual of saying goodbye. It is vital and supports the healing process. Many years later, I created a ritual to say goodbye to my beloved grandmother myself. A personal ritual can take many forms, and one example is the writing of a letter to the person in spirit that you love, and burying it in the garden while planting a new tree or shrub to celebrate that person. Much later, as a young teenager in Clare, under the watchful eye of my spirit grandmother, I had my first French kiss with a third or fourth cousin called Peter. Being much more worldly wise and English, he had never heard the term French kiss. It was just how it was done. Tongues were a part of kissing, and that was that. I, on the other hand, was a good Irish Catholic girl, and had a degree in cementing my lips firmly together and kissing like a seal, lest I commit a mortal sin, upset my parents, and be cast out of the house or into the burning fires of hell. However, I rose to the challenge, succumbed, and it was divine. Thanks, Peter. I have been doing it ever since. Teachers can arrive into our lives at any given moment, and in the strangest of guises, so stay alert. It is important to note here that my parents were strict Catholics and expected us to adhere to the rules and regulations of the Catholic Church. We were afraid not to. This teaching is so fear-based and controlling of a person's uniqueness and free will. However, there is a basic message of love and respect that is vital to learn in terms of how we treat ourselves and others, and this is the untainted gift of religious education. It was expected of us to go to confession each week, make up some venial sins, do our penance, attend Mass and Communion, kneel down and say the Rosary, pray before bedtime, go to sodality, give up everything you love during Lent, and attend all the Easter ceremonies. A level of religion that is based on love and understanding, not criticism and sacrifice, is comforting for children and adults alike. But a deep-seated teaching of repetitive unworthiness is very damaging. If I attend church now for a funeral service, wedding or other ceremony, I change the unworthy and sacrificial words in my mind to ones of love and honour. All prayers need to be reviewed, I guess, to honour the spiritual, emotional, mental and physical growth of this era in the earth. It was expected of us to know we were unworthy, weak human beings. Sex before marriage was a mortal sin and could get you excommunicated, a fate worse than death. Pregnancy before marriage did not even have a sin bracket, so disgusting was it. One hid one's daughters in a home somewhere, and the adoption papers were signed without question, and this was only 30 years ago. My mother told me many times that if I ever became pregnant before marriage, that I would be thrown out of the house and she would have nothing more to do with me ever again, which left me terrified. I was scared even kissing someone with my sealed lips, defying the danger of broken teeth from the pressure that sperm would sail from his body, through his clothing, through mine, and into my body that was shut like a vault. Logic did not come into it, just sheer terror of my mother and the church and being imperfect. The first time I told my beloved nieces these stories, they laughed till the tears rolled down their faces. Before I moved to the intensity of my teenage years, where all hell began to break loose, I want to tell you about the wonderful trip I took with my father to his home place, a one and only time in my childhood when I had him all to myself. I grew up with my mother's people in County Clare, but my father's mother, Catherine, died before I was born, and this trip was to be the one and only time I ever met my paternal grandfather, Thomas Sheehan. As I write, I feel sad our time together was so limited. My dad and I made the long journey of about 5 hours to the most southern part of Ireland, West Cork. We stayed for a night in the West Cork Hotel in Skibbereen, the only night I ever remember spending in a hotel as a child, where my father knew the owner. The next day we headed to Baltimore, one can go no further, and a fishing boat owned by a friend of my dad's took us the hour's journey to Cape Clear Island, known as Ilon Clara. As it was my first trip on a boat, I stared in awe at the ocean all around me. And as I am just a land-based whale, I felt right at home. I don't recall having visited the island previous to this. This trip felt like a series of firsts. We walked up the very steep hill of this beautiful, unspoiled island that smells of salt, sea, wild flowers and wonder, to my dad's home place. Kennedy, the big sheepdog, greeted us, along with Uncle Joe, my dad's brother, Julia, his wife, and the children. Down to the warm range I was drawn to sit with my grandfather for the first time ever. Instantly I loved him. His white hair and moustache, his dancing eyes, and warm hands of welcome pressing a gift of money into the palm of my hand. I felt him wrap his energy and love around me as only a grandparent can. It is a love born out of wisdom, compassion, and the innocence of old age and youth. In that short trip, I received a lifetime of love from my grandfather. That trip will be etched in my memory forever. He spent his life a fisherman on the ocean. And the ocean has a freedom of movement and openness that enables me to breathe with the greatest of ease. His energy radiated the ocean, and I felt embraced and held in the arms of his ocean. For that I am deeply grateful. As I write and remember my grandfather, I realize he genetically gifted me his dancing roguish eyes, the facial feature I love most. I adored my father and had him on a pedestal, I guess. Strangely, he never tumbled off, as most people we put on pedestals do. However, I am conscious of his humanness too. It was how he loved me that put him there, how he explained things to me so patiently, how he dealt with my fears and anxieties, as I was a very fearful and sensitive child at times. He was ultra patient with me, and only once do I remember him losing his temper when I was unfortunate enough to be caught spitting for some reason that must have been a worthy cause at the girl across the road. He called me in and slapped my legs so hard my mother begged him to stop. I never did that again, and neither did he. He checked for intruders under my bed, lifted out daddy longlegs and other insects from the bathroom, went with me into dark rooms upstairs to check them out before I slept, protected me from big boisterous dogs, and patiently taught me maths and Irish. He also spent endless hours explaining things to me, as knowledge dispels children's fears. I was scared of lots of things, so he had a full-time job. It is amusing to watch my patient brother father his daughters in the same way. What a lovely gift my father made available to his sons. My father was the parent who was ultra patient with me and my sensitivity. I don't think I would have survived without this type of nurturing. Of all he gave me, that is what I am most grateful for. My mother loved me in a different way. She created a warm, spotlessly clean, comfortable nest, beautiful homemade fresh food, and clean clothes, often made by her. She taught me how to knit, sew, embroider, cook, clean, wash my clothes, and look after my personal hygiene. She was very strict and disciplined, and though this felt like a trap to me, a level of this discipline stood to me when times were tough. My sensitivity was very difficult for her, as she did not allow herself to open up to her own emotions or sensitivity. She was afraid, I guess. My mam had a black leather strap about a foot long, rounded at each end, and boy did it sting when you got it on the hands and legs. If she threatened to slap you for misbehaving, she always carried it through, so being scared of her was a good option. It kept us in line. Her father used to slap them with the buckle of his belt, so her strap was much more humane. It is only in the last 15 to 20 years that we have found much more humane ways of disciplining our children without hitting. Society expected you to give your children a beating to keep them well behaved up till then. However, the slapping I got did not leave any long-term damage. What hurt a lot more was not being able to relate to my mother as a sensitive, emotional being. My emotions I wore on my sleeve. My mam's were deeply buried. During my teenage years, I felt a million miles away from her. I am deeply grateful for the safe haven and cozy nest she provided for me, for her endless hours of hard work and love, doing the very best she knew how for me. Also, the discipline and grounded focus she taught me has given me a framework that has been vital when one needs to keep going, no matter what life's challenges are.